I was talking to a friend while I was walking my little one. She would sit in some places and, start digging with a stick. And suddenly she started screaming.
Roy, Rose, and I were in the yard.
And she had this long stick, and I like to wear sandals.
I sat on a stump. I was like 5 or 6 and didn't know what it was.
And my friend noticed, there were ants creeping over her pants.
They like crawled all the way up my pants and all the way through and in everything.
So I walked over and I jumped in the pile, and they all came up onto my legs and bit me.
All of a sudden I started getting stung everywhere.
We had to undress her and she was like screaming out of all those different things.
So I like ran screaming up to my mom, who was gardening in the backyard.
The thing you want to do is get them off as quick as you can, and the hose was a good tool.
And the next day, I'm just looking at her feet in the car. She has them all stretched out. They're like these tiny shriveled pusty thingies, and I'm just like, I feel so bad for you.
When she's outdoors, she's like, is there ants here? Is there ants here? Is there ants here? She was paranoid for a while.
I, like many others, have the story of being a little kid and sitting in a fire ant mound because I didn't know what it was. So I think my first memories of fire ants are rather traumatic, running and getting sprayed by a garden hose straight in the face because it was the only way to get the ants off. That will color the way that you think about an animal for a long time. But, I am often in awe of them, impressed by how efficient they are, how good they are at utilizing any place that they end up in and any resources that they have available. To me, it seems that fire ants certainly are an organism that has quite an effect on a whole bunch of different ecosystems. Whether or not you would classify that as something to be of great concern about or something that's a nuisance, I think that really is just going to depend on who you talk to.
Fire ants are capable of really impacting people, the economy, agriculture, wildlife. They evidently can sting and cause allergic reactions, so there's harm to human health. But there were several important species, any ground nesting birds and animals. Probably now some of them have gone onto the threatened or endangered list as a consequence of fire ants coming through. Farmers, ranchers have problems. You'll see in open pastures this number of little fire ant mounds are dotted around. And obviously, if you have cattle and the cattle lay down to ruminate, chew the cud, you have some calves there, the fire ants get onto them and really impact their ability to have cattle. So we've heard that the amount of damage could be about as much as $6 or $8 billion per year of economic cost and loss in the United States as a whole.
I got a degree in ecology as an undergraduate, and my advisor actually was very involved with a lot of sea turtle conservation. And after I graduated, was able to put me in contact with a group that was studying sea turtles in Antigua. And that island was interesting in that the biggest animal that was an issue other than humans was fire ants. Fire ants that would get into the nest and attack the eggs and attack the hatchlings. And with that area, they were sort of just convinced that it was an issue that was never really something they could do anything about. And I kind of disagreed, having spent quite a bit of time with entomologists.
Although I didn't worry about it at the time, in retrospect, I always wondered if I didn't embarrass the kids because we were always diving into bushes and collecting stuff.
One of the reasons that when I initially encountered fire ants and things like turtle nests and felt like there was something that could potentially be done about it is that I grew up with an entomologist as a mother. And this is my mom, Dr. Chris Brayman, who is an entomologist who, for the most part, has worked with using natural predators as a management option, and has been a scientific influence and inspiration for the entirety of my life, for sure.
Even when he was just really little, his grandma got him a big bag of shells. And so he used to organize all the shells, classify things when you're 2 years old. The precursor to beach science.
Right.
So 3 of the islands that have larger sea turtle nesting populations for Georgia are Cumberland, Little St. Simons, and Sapelo. Part of our work seems to indicate that we have islands that are in various stages of invasion or introduction of fire ants. When I encounter people, oftentimes doing my field work and explain to them that I'm studying fire ants, one of the first things they often say is like, "Great, are you about to get rid of all the fire ants on the island? Are you going to come in and kill everything?"
You know, a lot of people hear the work of like sea turtle conservation and fire ants, and immediate click is like, oh, so you're going to get rid of all the fire ants, we're going to save the sea turtles, like this very clean narrative. And having to explain like that is a possibility, like yes, love to do that, but in reality what he's doing is cataloging what is even on these beaches, you know, and people would think like, what do you mean what's out there? We know it's like, actually we don't.
I mean, the fieldwork certainly isn't as glamorous as it sometimes seems. I go to dunes on sandy beaches and put out hot dog baits to attract any scavengers like ants that might be interested in, so that we can identify any ants that may be there. It's always pretty shocking to me how little I've gotten stung in the past couple of years doing these things. And there's nothing special to it, it's just attention to detail focus, right? You gotta make sure that your bag is open. You gotta make sure while you're doing it, you're not standing in the trail of ants that's on the ground. That's another one that gets me a lot, is I'm really good about grabbing the traps, but will forget to watch where I'm putting my feet, you know, and I can't blame them for anything, that sort of, because I'm totally invading their space. Depending on the species, with some of them, we'll only get a few. We can have up to 1,000, 1,500 in the busier samples, and especially in the fire ant samples. Fire ants can actually kill embryos inside of eggs just by stinging them. And so it's not always the case that they're even attacking hatchlings. Sometimes they just might be damaging the eggs inside the nest. I think for a lot of animals, particularly things that are already stressed, already have many other problems that they're dealing with, fire ants can be just one more thing. It's important to keep in mind that it's roughly something like 1 in 1,000 sea turtle hatchlings is going to make it to an adult. And there's particular nests, particular mothers, more often tends to successfully produce daughters that will be the sort of the next generation. And so if the one nest or the few nests that get hit by something, whether it's ants or raccoons or a coyote, was one of the nests that was going to be those successful daughters, like it can have a much bigger impact than it even seems. For fire ants, I think there's something to the remoteness of a place and whether or not fire ants have gotten there yet. For whatever reason, they seem to be very tied to people and their activities. There definitely is a debate as to whether or not fire ants are an organism that causes a lot of changes and disturbance, or if fire ants are something that is sort of a effect of other disturbances, things like people moving into an area, and that they're just good at taking advantage of things that other animals or humans are already doing. We as humans have this tendency to think of ourselves as sort of removed from everything. And so you look at something that we treat as an invasive or an exotic species like fire ants, where we'll be concerned with all the changes that they make. And you know, humans are quite good at altering the environment around them as well. It's hard to place definitive good or bad qualifiers on that sort of thing. It's just part of the biology of these things, much like humans are really good at taking advantage of opportunities, sometimes at the detriment of the environment and the other organisms around them. We definitely are seeing places at different stages of invasion, and I do think a big part of that is just how close to more inhabited areas they are, and also just sort of the history of the use of the islands that we were looking at. I think they're an organism that's here. They're an organism that needs to be better understood. The history of the last 100 years in the Southeast pretty much shows you that we're not going to get rid of fire ants, but we can learn ways of better managing them.